The 90s produced some of the greatest films around. It combined the genius of new Hollywood intelligence of the 70s and the big blockbuster film of the 80s. But when looking back today, some films from the 90s have not aged particularly well. Today we're going to look at a few of those. This doesn't mean that I think they're bad films or that means you definitely shouldn't watch them, just look at some of the elements that maybe wouldn't quite float today. So the first one is perhaps the most obvious, and that is the comedy American Pie. The kind of raucous jokes in here very much lean towards the misogynistic, particularly a scene where the young men set up cameras looking into a changing room of a load of young women. It was once praised as humorous and perhaps a bit edgy, but today it really just is a bit of an uncomfortable watch, some of it. I saw some article online where a load of Gen Zs were showed this film and were really sort of perplexed that this was ever thought of as funny. The scene I mentioned and others sort of trivialise consent and reflect a culture that kind of normalise such behaviour just for laughs. Overall, the approach to gender and boundaries really is viewed as quite outdated now, and it clashes with current values, although probably a hilarious watch at the time. The next film on the list is Sam Mendes' American Beauty. This is a tale of Kevin Spacey's character having a midlife crisis and falling in love with one of his teenage daughter's friends. Sounds pretty disturbing. It's one of those films you'd imagine was maybe a bit disturbing at the time, but maybe thought of as a bit edgy and different rather than just the uncomfortable nature of that relationship that we see now. The film definitely does use it as a symbol for the taboo, with him sort of trying to grab what he wants during this midlife crisis as he sort of rejects the American dream, which is kind of what the film's about. This has obvious issues in of itself, and the more you know about Kevin Spacey, which I don't want to go into myself, but I'm sure you can Google that quickly and find out, it makes this even more dark, sinister, and a film that maybe we should leave in the past. The next film is a slightly less obvious one that I think definitely fits into this category. It's Mike Leigh's Naked. It's a sort of sweeping vision of social decay, told through the story of Johnny, brilliantly played by David Thewlis. He's a kind of wannabe intellectual philosopher. He goes around London and sort of puts people down, but sees himself as a genius with a social statement to make. It's not that I have issues with him, he is a horrible character and that's kind of the point. The film quite gratuitously shows a few rape scenes. I'm not simply suggesting that this is a topic that should never be shown in films, but I think it's used as a kind of metaphor for sort of upper class exploitation of the poor or of working people. Leigh's choice to sort of use sexual violence to get his point across rather than engage with it on its own terms felt a bit uncomfortable to me. I think this is such a sensitive topic that if a director is going to choose to address it, then that should be what it's about, rather than it be used as a tool to explore something else. It's a really great film, it's one I still enjoy watching, but those scenes really do feel quite uncomfortable watching now, and maybe mean this film also fits into this category of 90s films that have aged terribly. The next film on the list is actually sort of two films put into one. Forrest Gump is included for the same reason that I could have included, but instead I've kind of bundled them together as The Waterboy. This film is undoubtedly one of the most enjoyable, fun and iconic films of the 90s. Forrest Gump that is, or maybe The Waterboy if that's one you look back on fondly. Forrest Gump is a sweeping narrative, it's kind of heartfelt, it is enjoyable. We see loads of social issues, but personally, I can't quite get over Tom Hanks playing someone with, although it's unspecified, learning difficulties. I think there's an element of him sort of putting a voice on here. I don't think this has aged well. I kind of feel uncomfortable watching him pretend to be someone with learning difficulties. I guess this raises all kinds of questions about who's allowed to play different people, and should an actor who maybe has so learning difficulties play those parts. I'm not sure what the answer to that question is, but watching Forrest Gump now, I do feel quite uncomfortable watching that. Not quite as in the same way where Adam Sandler is definitely just playing the Waterboy stutter for laughs, but I still not quite sure that these films have aged brilliantly. And it's always good to include Forrest Gump on a list where I might be putting it down a bit, as this film won Best Picture over Pulp Fiction and Shawshank Redemption, which I think looking back we can all agree is not a great decision. The next film I've included on the list is one that I love from childhood, Dances with Wolves, directed by and starring Kevin Costner. It's a huge sweeping narrative, but also sort of slow building character drama. I watched the extended edition and it's sort of nearly up about 4 hours, a proper Kevin Costner fest. The film does confront sort of racist, anti-native narratives of the 1800s and the sort of frontier, and perhaps maybe of today as well, but fundamentally it does kind of fall back on a kind of white saviour narrative. Costner plays a white soldier who has to sort of save the Indians from the white man. It sort of suggests that maybe they're not able to do this themselves. It's definitely not as overtly racist as some earlier westerns, things like The Searchers come to mind, but there is, like I said, this white saviour narrative, and I think this film probably doesn't get made today. And the last film on the list is Leon the Professional. Whilst praised for its emotional depth and complex characters, it's been widely criticised for the unsettling relationship between adult hitman Leon and 12-year-old Matilda. Yep, 12. Although intended as a story about friendship and redemption, the film sort of blurs the boundaries in ways that do feel inappropriate and uncomfortable. I imagine that must have been the case at the time, but definitely does today. Matilda's attachment to Leon is depicted with sort of suggestive undertones and a certain hint at a romantic dynamic that's sort of troubling and maybe even unnecessary. The film might have just functioned as an interesting action film without that. What may have once been seen as sort of edgy and unconventional now just feels very uncomfortable with sort of young girl's affection for an adult. This becomes even more unsettling when you hear about Luc Besson, the director, and his relationship with his 16-year-old wife at the time. When they met, she was 12 or 13 it may have been, and he was 29, which is crazy, and the fact they've gone on to get married is unsettling, uncomfortable. And if there are any doubts about whether Leon is an acceptable way of presenting these sorts of relationships, I think for me that's the nail in the coffin, that this is definitely a film we should leave in the 90s and doesn't really merit a rewatch. So I'm sure there are loads of other films that maybe could have been included from here. Get in the comments and let me know if there are any others, or if you disagree with any of the things I've said here. Let me know if there are any other decades that you'd like me to look at for this kind of thing. I think it's really interesting to look at films sort of and judge them by today's sort of moral standards without throwing them completely out the window, but just looking at how they've aged and the statements they made at the time. As always, if you enjoyed this video, give us a like and subscribe. Again, we're not getting loads of views and stuff, but I'm really enjoying making these videos, and it'd be great to hear what other people want to see.